getting this okay? If I don't hold it up, are you getting it okay? No, I have to hold it up. Shit. All right, that's gone on the podcast. Hi, so David McClyment, for those people that don't know me, and welcome to this first session of Change Your Story. I'll give you my background as we go through here, but basically I'm an artist, a fine artist. Been doing this professionally for 40 years, most recently teaching here at Centennial College, but we'll get into all of that. And there I am. I think I'm 6.
Well, that was you when you were young.
That's me when I was 6 years old, you know, pointed head, big ears. And I think I'm proud of my Santa painting. But you can see it, and Sarah, who knows me from class, you can see that I was a lazy artist and I couldn't be bothered to wash my brush out. So I must have painted his Santa suit red first and then dipped it into the white. And so Santa has a pink beard. And so that's where I started. And this now is a self-portrait of myself recently. So there I am, sort of the yin and yang from 6 to 66. Folks, thinking about this topic, change your story, just by the nature of what I professionally I am and what I've sought to do as an artist, it's the changing your story thing is, you just take it for granted. It happens, it has to happen so many times in so many ways that it's not that I've forgotten what my real story is. I've changed it so many times, but my story is the change. And it happens professionally and artistically. And what I'm going to do is, if you like, I've tried to sort of organize my life into different sections, and I'll just walk you through them briefly, and then if you're interested in one or some of them, we can go back and talk about them in detail. Oh yeah, that's the inside of my brain, a bit blurry. So I guess by way of describing who I am personally, and I guess I can only talk for myself, but to project it onto other people who have a creative bent, yeah. And my partner will tell you this if you ask Sue. I'm as stubborn as the day is long. I am also as stupid as the day is long, but so it helps, right? I just don't give up. I don't know when to stop, and I just don't give up. The other thing, I do rely quite a bit on my own intuition. It's not that I'm anti-intellectual or against analysis, but I think that my life anyways, I try to live it as a holistic way as possible, which is not purely rational. So subconscious, emotional, spiritual, physical, and the rational all rolled into one. But that, for me, turns into intuition. Yeah, resilience. You get told no enough times, you got to be able to bounce back from that and keep going. And certainly as an artist, you get told way more times than you get told no way more times than you get told yes. Adventure, well, it sort of goes into the play part. And I'll talk to you about my creative process if you're interested in it, but largely I walk into my own artwork without knowing what I'm doing on purpose, because I get bored really fast. And if I know what I'm doing, I get bored and I'll stop. So for me, all my artwork is really about this. It's about playing. I often tell my students, and we have some here in the room, and you've heard this before, Sarah, when my art practice becomes work, I'll stop. I'm smart enough, I can do something else. But so far for 40 years it's been playing, and I consider myself blessed. And the other thing I would say to all of you by way of advice, and this is sort of a logical thing, say yes before you say no. If you say no, you'll never know what happens. If you say yes, then something's going to happen. Might be bad, might be so-so, might be great. But if you don't say yes, you won't know. And so I've lived with this motto for years now. I don't usually regret saying yes. And sometimes I should say no, but because just for my own well-being, but yeah. Okay. I broke my story up into 8 parts. And it's, like I said, it's not really changing my story. It's one story with 8 different chapters. So I can talk to you about when I was a kid, being a shy kid, being bullied and turning into a bully. I could talk to you about some of my experience in school, which sucked large. I could talk to you about how I've supported myself through the years with different kinds of jobs. I can talk to you about my experience at art school, which was a long time ago now. Life as an adult, trying to fend your own way, importance of family and support. I've got a little bit I can show you about how changing in the middle of your creative practice is helpful. I can talk to you, if you like, about a really sort of crappy part of my life, job that went sour, wrestling with cancer, and then wrestling with depression, and then sort of a summary of where I'm at now. So that's your menu. And let me just walk you through it briefly, and then we can come back to what you might want to hear more about. Okay, this is a drawing of me. Ken, you're looking at my drawings. These are all big. This drawing would be, let's call this, and I'm an old guy, imperial measure. Let's call this 8 feet. Let's call it 8 feet square if you drew around it. And by way of media, it's largely charcoal, but there's some collage stuff and a bunch of other stuff going on in there. And that's me, I think, probably in 1957, based on a photograph of me in 1957, trying to figure out the hula hoop. Anybody here do hula hoops? Yeah, you any good at it? Oh yeah? See, my older brother was not good at it. And so I figured if I could be good at it, then I'll be the kid that my parents love the most, right? But I wasn't very good at it either. Anyways, just to talk about this, and it's right in the news right now, about the violence in the schools reports that the CBC's been running. I don't want to go into it too much unless you want to talk to me, ask me to give you more detail. I grew up basically just around the corner at O'Connor and St. Clair, which is about 20 minutes from here. It should have been a very normal place, and I've learned subsequent that it was not normal. I've stopped telling people stories about my childhood and going to school because they don't believe me, and then you realize, well, they're just violent. I was a really happy child, make no mistake. I was beat up every day. Every day from as long as I could remember, all the way through public school, until I learned how to throw the first punch. And it was just that's the neighborhood that I lived in. And before I went to school, the older siblings, my older brother included, you know what dog baiting is? Where they pit dogs against each other? Well, they would pit their younger brothers and sisters against each other. I'd have to go and fight these kids. Like, what? Okay. And I'd always have to fight this kid sort of had like a problem, like an incontinence problem. It's really, okay, it's too much information, right? And so that's where I grew up. And you know, what that turned me into was a bully. Because people bullied me, and that's the way life goes, I think. And so by way of trying to heal yourself, you bully someone else. And so we can talk more about that if you like. And like I said, don't get me wrong, I had a relatively happy childhood. Like I said, maybe I'm too stupid to know otherwise. But that violence went on all the way through high school. And I can tell you some stories about East York Collegiate Institute, which is at the other end of Mortimer. That might be eye-opening. Okay, story number 2. When I went through school, especially at the high school level, the arts weren't presented as an option. In fact, at the school I went to, if you wanted to be in the visual arts, you were put in the opportunity class with dumb kids, right? So, you know, that's what they thought of it. And so going through school, I always wanted to be an artist. I just didn't know how to do it. And certainly my mother was very, very supportive of me being an artist, but she didn't know how to do it either. So I followed my older brother, who is now a very successful lawyer, about to retire. And I thought I'd go into law. And so I went to University of Toronto first. I have a degree in a bachelor's degree specializing in political science, which I don't regret. A lot of my work is still overtly political, but it was sort of like thinking about that time in school. It was fine. It was intellectually challenging, but it wasn't very satisfying. And by the time I finished university, I was looking around at my buddies who were hell-bent on going into law, and, you know, I don't want to be you. See you around. And I took a year off, and in that year, I thought more about my life, and I made the decision to go to art college. But for, 4 years of high school and then another 4 years at university, school was just not exactly a wasteland. It was more like limbo. Nothing much was going on. Except, that's me. So that's the little kid. Now, without a beard, I think I'm 21.
That's you when you were an adult?
Yes. So to speak. I don't know that I'm an adult now. One of the things I learned to do at university by way of maintaining my sanity, because I was at U of T, there's like 90,000 students. It can be a very lonely place. And after my first year, I said I better do something where I meet some people, and I got myself involved on the cross-country ski team and skied competitively for them. And then that, without thinking that would lead anywhere, that led into a job. God bless, I was a ski instructor for a year or more. Ended up managing this outdoor education facility, and that was a blast. I've never been in better shape. You get up in the morning, 7 o'clock, maybe earlier. You ski the trails in. This is cross-country skiing. You ski the trails in, so you might do 10, 15 clicks in the morning before breakfast. You have something to eat, and then your classes start. You ski, you ski, you ski, you ski, you ski. And at the end of the day, you ski the trails back in, because invariably there'll be some numbskull who's decided to take a wineskin out on the trails, because that's what you're supposed to do with cross-country skiing. Cross-country skiing is incredibly physically demanding, and you pour alcohol into your system, it just shuts your system down. And so I'd find people that were like 8 kilometers away from where they wanted to be, sort of sitting on the snow exhausted and the sun going down, and it was my job to get them back safe and sound to the lodge. So anyways, I was in excellent shape. Ate like you wouldn't believe. They couldn't believe how much the skinny guy could consume. What I'd like to, I'll maybe come back to this, but talking about changing my story. So I've always wanted to be an artist. I took a detour to go to university, ended up teaching. When I was doing this, by the way, I was living in a 2-story log cabin back in the bush and doing drawings in my spare time. That led to my application to the Ontario College of Art. But so to support myself as an artist, in 40 years, I've probably had 35 different jobs. At least 35. I'm not kidding, and I can name them for you, but you just get bored, but I'll go through some of them. And the reason is because of what I wanted to be as an artist, and you'll see my work. You saw the pink bearded Santa Claus, and then you saw my drawings. My artwork is well received, but it doesn't generate enough money in sales to survive from, so I've always had to support myself. doing something else. I figure on an average year I put $10,000 to $15,000 into my art career. That's my money. Multiply that by 40, right? That's, you know, a fair bit of coinage that I've invested in my art career, and happy to do it. But in all that time, I used to have my own home renovation business, and used to put up aluminum siding, and I know I'll go to cultural purgatory for that. I'll do time for aluminum siding. But I used to do home renovations. I worked in an administrative capacity as a clerk in the emergency department of the world's worst hospital in London, England for a while. I worked with mentally challenged adults out west. I got pretty heavily involved with arts administration, where I was a membership coordinator and I ran an art rental program. And then I put together workshops and started to write books, and I worked for the ROM for a while, and helping them install their dinosaurs. That's a whole other, I could tell you some stories about that. I'll just give you a quick tip about the ROM. When you're looking at the dioramas, right, like where the lions are and the stuffed animals, just get up tight to the glass and look down. It's giant rat traps. Uh-oh, I've lost two. Eventually, I went to art school, and that was unbelievable. Now, the art school I went to was the Ontario College of Art. It was not the Ontario College of Art and Design, nor was it the Ontario College of Art and Design University. It was a community college. It was 4 years. And honestly, and I know this is my own conceit, I can't remember a single thing they taught us. But I spent 4 years there, so I know they taught me something, and it was heaven. What do you mean? You want me to draw for all day? What? That's okay? You want me to paint all day? It was absolutely fabulous. All right, so at art school and then into the adult world, and again, like I said, sort of wrestling to find bucks, wrestling to find opportunities to show my artwork, all of which was happy. A lot of changes going on there because I hadn't really thought much about how you're supposed to survive as an artist, so I was learning as I went. And one of my first jobs coming out of art school, coming back from England, I lived there for a while. I was fortunate enough to get some money coming out of OCA in terms of grants and scholarships, and lived there for a while. And then coming back, I had no money. I ended up teaching little kids, 12-year-olds, teaching them art, and I did that for a long time. Eventually I found that was draining my own personal reserves of creativity, and so I left that, eventually went into, like I said, home renovation, administration, a whole batch of other stuff. And then after long deliberation, my partner and I, we've been together 43 years this year. After being together for 13 years, we said, well, should we have kids? Well, how can we have kids? I'm an artist. We don't have any money. But after being together for 13 years, like we're getting into our mid to late 30s, we said, look, you know, this isn't getting any better. If we're going to have a child, we better have a child. And so that's Jamie. We went down to Cuba to conceive him, and look what we brought back. And that's my hand. He was born prematurely. He was as big as a little mushroom, you know, when he was born. And he's a happy, talented guy right now. And so some portraits I've done, also very large drawings. This is my beautiful partner, Sue, and that's my talented, handsome, and extremely smart son, our son, who's 30 years old now. One thing I would talk to you about in terms of creativity, and I do talk about this to our students, my students all the time, is I am eminently blessed to have those two people in my life. and before Jamie was born, blessed to have Sue. You need to surround yourself with people who believe in what you're doing. And if you don't, it's just a rocky road. But if someone believes in the value of art, the value of the creative process, and understands it on an intimate level, then you can get through, if you've got that support around you, then you can get through all kinds of difficult times. Jamie, Sue's a poet. I'm an artist, visual artist. Jamie came into a family of artists. Before Sue was a poet, she was a professional dancer. So he grew up, he's the most talented musician I have ever met. But he's changed his story too. He played professionally for about 12 years, didn't like the bar scene, has gone back to school, and is about to graduate from Centennial with 2 diplomas. I don't understand how you do that. But 2 diplomas in environmental design, environmental tech and biotech. And he's also a very profound and committed Buddhist, and runs sessions and teaches Tai Chi, and is the local kombucha brewmeister, if anybody's into kombucha. Okay, this is just sort of in between, sort of talking about me professionally, but just a part of my creative process. You know, one of the things I always ask artists to do is, okay, they'll tell me I'm not a successful artist. Well, what do you mean? What does that mean to you? What is failure to you, and what does success mean? And for me, at this point, my definition of success, and I am blessed, I make what I want, when I want, how I want it. Nobody tells me what to do. That's both good and bad, but it might be good for me to take some advice every once in a while, but I'm never short of ideas about what I want to make. When I first started my creative journey as a young man, 18, 19, thinking about it, and then a few years later going to the Ontario College of Art, and I wanted to be the artist who painted this. This is Andrew Wyeth. We're talking early 1970s. You might remember, my friend, but I doubt it. You couldn't go anywhere without seeing this image. He was super famous, and it was long before digital, but there were posters everywhere. If you went to a restaurant, there was this poster. If you went to use the loo in your friend's house, there was this poster. It was everywhere. The artist's name is Andrew Wyeth, and this particular image is called Christina's World. He comes out of what's called the Brandywine tradition on American East Coast, like Maine, New Hampshire. I was really attracted to it. That's who I wanted to be. I wanted to be the artist who made that. And what I set out to do early on at the Ontario College of Art was learn how to do that, which is basically high representationalism. So I learned everything I could learn about that. Starting with, this might not make sense to people that haven't dabbled in the visual arts, but starting with arcane media like egg tempera and oil tempera, I know how to do that. And I used to do that a lot, right? And then if you go back to Mr. Wyeth here, that is in fact, I believe that's an egg tempera painting, but he also achieved the same effect with watercolor. And so I started to do these large watercolors, not as big as the screen, but maybe 2/3 of the size, and trying to be as realistic as I could. And so this is sort of a self-portrait of me on the subway. I don't know really how I did it, because I didn't have any cameras or anything. It would have all been out of my head, figuring out who, what, where, and trying to figure out the reflections and all of that. But what I realized about this process is that anybody can be a high realist if you want. It's just a matter of investing time. And it's like 1,000 strokes, 1,000 hours. And I just found that my life was too short, and that was too boring. And as I said, to get to even something as mediocre as this painting, you had to plan it all out in advance, and you had to follow your plan. And I decided I didn't want to do that. And so within fairly short years coming out of the Ontario College of Art, I had changed directly and was looking for a more spontaneous, more immediate, unpredictable way of working. So this painting is maybe a third larger than what that image is, and I worked in this format for close to 30 years. So this is hand-drawn stencils. So everything that looks like a line there is a hole in a piece of paper. So I've drawn the creature, spent a lot of time with all the details as per my training at the Ontario College of Art. And then again, with my training and the patience, because I have that within me to have this a perfectionist thing, I'd sit and cut out all the little holes and then take spray bombs and spray through the holes onto what this is prepared plywood. And prepared means that I've just dumped gallons, literally, of, in this case, marine enamel. Anybody work with enamel? No? You might be surprised, if you had, that I'm able to stand here and talk to you. It's about as toxic as you can get in terms of fumes, and I don't smell it anymore, right? So I worked with that for a million years and built these very elaborate pieces that were based on process. Laying the stencil down, I'm not sure what the next one is here. Yeah, some more. Laying the stencil down once, not liking it. Okay, let's paint it out. Let's draw in a, let's get my belt sander out. It's really, really therapeutic to work on wood because you can grind stuff down. And then eventually, after working with wooden stencils for quite a long time, I got tired of the shtick with the wood. I like wood because it's not anonymous. It brings its own personality in the grain to the piece that you're working on. Like a white piece of paper is just blank. Wood has its own voice, but I got tired of that, and so I decided I would work on something even more ephemeral, and I worked on large pieces of cardboard. These paintings are about that size. They're sort of like giant postcards from the future coming back after some kind of cataclysmic environmental event. And I remember having the conversation with my dealer at the time. I was represented by David Kay, who has become a good friend. And I'd had a few shows, and I said, hey, Dave, for this next show coming up, look, I'm changing what I'm working on. He says, okay, this is on the telephone. Yeah, look, I'm changing it to cardboard. Dave, are you there? And he goes, oh, okay. and Dave, there's more. I set it all on fire. And so you can see these are all burn holes all the way through here. And so when we installed it in the gallery, at least initially, it was so beautiful because all the bits of burnt paper, charcoal, were falling off. There's maybe 40 of these things. Were falling off on the floor. It was this most beautiful tinkling sound. Sort of like glass breaking, but not quite, just tinkle, tinkle, tinkle. And as we were installing it, somebody came in and said, could I have this? And it was a fairly big sized chunk, and I said, sure. And Dave Kay, my artist dealer, said, what are you, crazy? You have to sell that anyways. I wasn't selling anybody a chunk of ash. Some more of these are about size as. This is the drawing I would have done for, I did a whole series, so this one's about volcanoes, but this drawing comes from the same series. This is about Niagara Falls retreating, and so that drawing would be about that size, and then every place that you see on that drawing that's black, I will cut out. I would have cut out and made a hole. And one of the tricks of doing stencil work is you have to design what you're cutting, because as soon as you complete a circle, no matter how complicated it is, it falls out on the floor. So you can never complete a circle. There's some of the stencils that I cut. A portrait of my son. And so, like, I have this potential for this really sort of incredibly annoying, detailed work, and I'm happy enough doing it. You sort of a finite challenge. You know what you have to do. You go through it, and I usually put the Leafs on, and so listening to the hockey game, and so most of my paintings and artworks from this time should be called like Leafs 2, Philadelphia 6, Leafs 0, Boston 4. And just about the time that Sarah, you were in the program, I was starting to lose interest in the whole stencil thing. I had done it a long time, and it was getting to be a little bit of a shtick, and there wasn't much more that I wanted to explore with it. And one of our classes was presenting me with a challenge about painting. In our campus, for example, we don't have the proper ventilation to do oil painting. It's the solvents that are the real problem, but oil paint itself has a fairly distinctive odor, and you start to work with solvents like terps or whatever. It can be a fairly difficult environment, and if anybody's sensitive to it, to fragrances like that, it's a real problem. And so we don't do much oil painting here. It's sort of an abridged version. And sort of as a default, most of the students work in acrylic paint. And for those that don't know about acrylic paint, the advantage of acrylic paint, it dries in about 30 seconds. The disadvantage to acrylic paint is it dries in about 30 seconds. So if you're working really fast and you know what you're doing, then you can manipulate the paint. But if you even take a breath to think it's dried, and when it dries, it leaves a very hard edge, which is fine, except if you want your imagery, like if you're working on a two-dimensional surface, it can go this way, or it can go this way, or you can fool the viewer into thinking it goes this way. And if you want to be able to do this, hard edges are a real problem. They flatten the picture out. And so I was trying to say, well, how can I show this about having a softer edge? And I didn't have acrylic paint in my studio, so I've got charcoal and some paper. I can do it with that. I better make it concrete, so what should I draw? I don't know. What's black? Crows are black. I'll draw crows. And holy smokes, from that led to this. I just started on this big chunk of paper. This is 5 feet by 15 feet. You can see it installed in my studio. And for those that are ever interested in this, working large is dead simple. It's much easier than working smaller because there's more wiggle room, more latitude for making mistakes. This is now starting to work back in some stencil work because I had done that for years, and I've got about 1,000 stencils in my studio that I can pull out. So the color work there is of stencils of a floral arrangement that I've sprayed into the scene. More of the same. This is more recent work. Had it exhibited last year at the First Canada Place Gallery. Going down memory lane, so that's where I grew up, Parkview Hills, O'Connor and St. Clair. And my parents, who I love dearly and were very, very good people, were part of that culture, you know, coming out of the Depression, coming out of the war, and material gain was important. Yeah, Darlene. You know, it's yeah. That's a really intelligent question, and it's never been asked of me quite in that way, but I would say absolutely yes. And the one thing, like, it's incredibly impractical to work large because who shows it, how do you store it, and all of that. On the other hand, creatively, it's exactly what I did when I was a kid. My mom, to get me out of her hair, said, "Here, David, draw on this." And she'd hand me anything. and I would draw, and I'd be happy as a clam for as long as it took me to do the drawing. But you know, Deline, when I was a kid, I realized what I was doing. I wasn't drawing anything. I was telling myself stories. Something would happen here, and then something would happen here, and it was a story. I wasn't making a picture so much as it was a map of a series of events. And I realized, you know, after trying to go through all kinds of intellectual somersaults about what my art is or isn't, as per sort of a more rigorous academic approach, what I've realized, no, it's the same. I just tell stories. And the first person I tell the story to is myself. And then what I would hope is that the stories are open-ended enough. I leave enough doors open in the imagery that everybody here, if you gave it enough time and patience, you could walk in and tell yourself your own story. Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right. It's about playing. And then, you know, Deline, if you're sitting at a desk like this with a book like an 8.5 by 11, it's a very confined, and it's very much front of, brain activity. If you're working on something that's as long as this whiteboard, well, first of all, that's physical theater. You're standing, you're moving, you're dancing all around. Usually, in addition to the Leafs losing, I usually compensate for that by playing really loud, obnoxious music at the same time. So I'm having this party in my studio while I'm projecting myself onto this big white piece of paper. And I know where I started this drawing, and never again. Trying to get the grill work. This is a Mercury Meteor 1963. And trying to get that grill work done because it was so detailed. But otherwise, I usually just start, and then the drawing more. It's like with those crow drawings. I remember this drawing. I started right there. I just wanted to draw some clouds. And then, okay, it's like, okay, how do I now set the rest of the stage? And I had clouds, well, you know, okay, then, well, waterfalls would be fun, and so on and so on. And then eventually hands and flowers came into the image. This more recent stuff, this more self-portraits, because I can torture myself with impunity. I get a little uncomfortable if I'm torturing other people. Playing around with all kinds of junk on the paper. So for those that are keeping score at home, this is now paper, not wood, but it's all sanded. I take my belt sander to it, my orbital sander to it. I gouge through it. I let holes come up. I tear it. I'm looking for any opportunity for serendipity to intervene in my process. And so you can see here there's where the paper's ripped. I bought a whole batch of really cheap, you know, plastic rhinestones, stuck them on. This is spray paint. This is layers of spray paint, layers of black forming a grid, followed by layers of white, forming an alternate grid over top, some more stencil work, and then a whole lot of drawing going on top of that. Are you guys interested in this process, or should I move on? Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
What intrigues me is that you did this type of work in 1970 that was similar to, there was a big movement in hyperrealism.
Yes.
Like Chuck Close.
Yes. Yes.
Andy,
Yes.
You know.
Yes.
Who went to OCAD, and you were doing that. So, and I really like that. I like
Right?
I love personally. But I love this what you're showing here now. But I'm interested. Why? I guess you kind of answered it. I guess you were just frustrated with I don't want to work within a grid. I want to just be real. You had like this. You couldn't be Andrew Wyeth, you know.
Not if I tried.
You know.
Yeah.
I have
Right.
6 books of his.
Yeah.
I'm obsessed with his
Yeah.
dry brush.
Yeah.
So, I don't know what I'm trying to say. I find it interesting. You just sort of went. I can't do this anymore, and I gotta.
Well,
you know what I mean?
in fact, what happened, and I know I'm watching time here because we got to finish up. In fact, what happened was that I had a shared studio at the time, and my partners, my studio mates, because I'd fuss endlessly with a painting, like I couldn't get it right, fuss endlessly, and they basically told me, you touch the painting again, McClyment, we're going to cut your hands off. Like, leave it alone, it's done. And what I found that I was nervous about was in painting, was losing the drawing. Because I was more a natural drawer than painter. And so I was nervous about that. And so I was really, I don't want to lose the drawing. My partner, who at the time was a dancer, got a gig at Harbourfront, and the choreographer needed imagery. And so well, my man's an artist, and what they needed, this is pre-digital, they needed 600 images flashed with a bank of slide projectors onto the dancers as they were performing. And so I got that gig, and I realized, well, I couldn't, like, I have to be able to mass produce these images, and this is in the 70s, so before computers. And I realized, well, if I cut a stencil, I can bing, 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 I can make a lot of these things and turn them into slides, and that's what we did. And then I realized, holy smokes, this might be the answer to my problem. I can do it as elaborate a drawing as I want, and some of them got really elaborate, some of them got as tall as this room. And I know, okay, I can screw this up as much as I want, because I know all I have to do is lay that stencil down and spray paint through it, and the drawing's back. And in some of those drawings, I might have laid the stencil down 50, 60 times, you know. But it was like that parachute, or that that solved that problem for me. A series of drawings I've done recently that I really dislike, because I've been there, done that. This is ruminations on my garden. And so just by way of process, I'm talking about changing the story. So these each are like 30 by 40, and they're charcoal on paper. And they're just, I have a garden near my studio, and I like it quite a bit. And so I was sort of using it as a point of meditation. But I've been there too many times. I know what the result was going to be. It's going to be too predictable. So I photographed them, took them into my computer, played around with them in my computer. In fact, inverted them in Photoshop. So inversion means that black becomes white. Flipped them, printed them out, put them on the floor of my studio, did everything I could to abuse those poor little drawings. And I printed them out as 8.5 by 11, so they're smaller now. So I'd walk on them, I sanded them, I shot hockey pucks at them, all kinds of stuff, and beat them all up. And then asked my partner, poet, can you respond to this work in the form of words? And she did, and you can't quite see here, but there's text interlaced through all of that. Oh, we're just about out of time, folks. We'll save that for some other talk, some other time. I guess the thing, I don't know whether you want to hear about this or not as well, but since I've been teaching here at Centennial College, and it's nothing to do with Centennial College, so I've been teaching here 13 years. I've dealt with cancer twice. I've had a major bout of depression. For those that know the story, and I won't get into details, I'll just let you fill that in. I tore all the tendons of my quadriceps off my knee riding an easel down that ramp. All of which happened to me while I'm teaching, while I'm doing an artist. And it's, wow. That's difficult, I suppose. But I got through it. I would like to think that none of my students knew that any of that stuff was going on with me. Having support around me, friends, faculty, family, students, helped immensely. Having sort of the belief in my artwork as a focus helped a lot. Yeah. Okay, we're almost done. So, not to end on a bummer, but I actually see that as extremely positive. You go through that kind of stuff, every day you wake up, you count your blessings, right? Hey, rock and roll, let's bring it, you know, and so that's sort of been my mantra ever since. I think we're getting urged to leave the room. So, any last questions? Any more words of wisdom from me? You've probably, Sarah, you've heard all these stories. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Yeah. And you guys all know where to find me, and Ken, you'd be welcome anytime. Let's sit and talk.
I'd love to get your email if that's
I'm going to give you my card as we walk out the door. I'm not here every day, so send me a note and we'll pick a time and it'll work.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate you listening. Thanks, folks.